Well, a very good morning to everybody who's live with us today on this series called Resilient Lincolnshire. It's 9 a.m. on May the 19th, and we're very, very pleased to have you with us. Today, we are running live on Facebook, via LinkedIn, and YouTube, all the channels of the Lincoln International Business School. I'm Ruchi Agarwal. I'm the Director of Business Development for the Lincoln International Business School at the University of Lincoln, and I want to extend a very warm welcome and thank you for joining us today. So today we are in episode 6 of what we call Business Beyond the Curve in the series of Resilient Lincolnshire. Now, if you've been following us across the many conversations we've been having over the last month or so, it's great. But for those of you who have not, I'll just give a very quick recap. So the business school and the university stay in very close contact with businesses in Lincolnshire, and it is our duty to be able to provide a platform for academics and industry to speak about issues that matter for success. So when we found ourselves in this situation of the moment in history that we are in, we decided to put up a digital platform where we can continue those conversations irrespective. So Resilient Lincolnshire was hence born, and we are currently running 2 strands of conversations on this platform. One of them is an executive education series, which you'll see week after week of our academics leading on topics and issues that really matter to the industry in the format of executive education. The second series is the one that you're engaged in right now, which is called Business Beyond the Curve. And this was conceptualized as a series of key conversations on issues that really matter for us to look at where we are now, importantly, what is it beyond that curve? Now, you could interpret the curve as the curve of business, the curve of the flattening of the curve that we all want to happen, and how we can deal with the situation that we are in. And we've had tremendous amount of success, from various people, giving in their comments and logging in and wanting to be part of this conversation. So today is episode 6, and we have a topic that possibly affects all of us in many, many ways, whether you live here, whether you work here, whether you do business with Lincolnshire. It's a topic that's important to everybody, which is the visitor economy. Now, the visitor economy forms a foundation for Lincolnshire, bringing people in for various reasons into this beautiful county. And quite honestly, we were very, very spoiled for choice when we had to pick a panel. And we had so many people who are so apt for a conversation like this on the dynamics of the visitor economy. And we've managed to get a wonderful panel here to get together today that I'm very, very proud of, that I shall introduce to you in a minute. So I first want to introduce, who the head of school and the Pro Vice Chancellor for the Lincoln National Business School, Craig Marsh. And morning, Craig.
Good morning, Richie. How are you?
Thank you. Very well, thank you. And Craig's going to be leading the conversation with our panelists today that we've brought in for this conversation. And Craig, what a lovely day to actually have this, topic of visitor economy, because there's been phenomenal news today about the red arrows, and so significantly on today's day.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely excellent news. I mean, I think all of those who are associated with Lincolnshire have come to appreciate just how, I suppose, in some ways symbolic the red arrows are of the success of the visitor economy in Lincolnshire. I mean, they're symbolic not only from a UK perspective, but also from a global perspective. They really are a global brand now, and that is going to have a massive impact. And for those of us who've even been lucky enough to meet some of the red arrows, it really is a superb start to our discussion on the visitor economy. Nice to get some good news.
Absolutely, absolutely, significantly so, and we look forward to seeing them, flying the skies above, iconic locations like a castle, a cathedral, and indeed, the many areas of the county. So, brilliant. So, I'll take the opportunity to introduce our panel in. Craig, and I'll bring them up and say hello before I hand them over to you. So, first up, Lydia. Good morning.
Good morning, Ruchi.
Morning. Lydia possibly needs very, very little introduction. She's the ex-CEO of Visit Lincoln. Very, very important to, the landscape of where we are and, how we work as a county. But Lydia currently is the head of economic development and growth at the East Lindsey Council. So a very warm welcome to you, Lydia. Kimberly is our next panelist. Kimberly, good morning.
Morning, Rishi.
Morning. A very, very key part of history, is under your, able leadership. And Kimberly is the general manager. Again, needs hardly any introduction of the Lincoln Castle. And we're very, very pleased to have you with us today, Kimberly.
Thank you.
we wanted to make this conversation, 360 degrees and, well-rounded. So we did bring in a very important, business to Lincolnshire. Chris, morning, Chris.
Morning, Rishi.
And Chris is the resort director for Butlins. We would all recognize it as consumers, a place which gets plenty of footfall from Lincolnshire and a very important part of the visitor economy. So we look forward to hearing you, Chris.
Thank you.
Absolutely no conversation can be complete without an academic perspective on what's at the forefront of what the business school and the university does very well. So we're extremely pleased to bring Farhan in. Farhan, good morning.
Good morning, Ruchi. Good morning, everyone.
Morning. And Farhan is our head of department for marketing and tourism, a very, very key voice for what's at the forefront of what education does in the sector. So Craig, I'll hand over this wonderful panel to you, and I'll see you at the end of this.
Thank you so much, Ruchi. So good morning, everybody. It's great to be here with you this morning, and I think we've got what I think are probably our best panel so far of the series, and the reason for that, I think, is we've got such a breadth of experience in the subject this morning, and that doesn't apply to me. My job is to extract the knowledge, experience, and information from my four guests, because you're the experts in this subject of the visitor economy. And of course, the visitor economy, as Richie has alluded to, is one of those that has been most affected by our current situation. So I think one of the things that we may want to do is I'd like to perhaps start by inviting each of my panelists just to share your first of all a little bit about your role. So say a little bit more about what it is that you do and your contribution to that. And then we can start to talk a little bit about how you're seeing things right now, and then we can sort of set the scene in that way. So, so Lydia, perhaps I can bring you in first, and given that you've got a fairly broad understanding, I think, and experience of the visitor economy in Lincolnshire. So, perhaps just for the benefit of our listeners, say a little bit about what your role entails and what your responsibilities are. Lydia?
Thank you, Craig. So I've worked in tourism in Lincolnshire since 2004, and I think I've known both Kimberly and Chris for the same amount of time. And I started off working for the destination marketing organisation Visit Lincolnshire, which is like the tourist board for the county. I've also worked for the county council and was part of the regeneration of Lincoln Castle. Still probably a highlight of my career, actually. Wonderful place. And I've also recently moved, about 6 months ago, to East Lindsey District Council, which covers the Lincolnshire Wolds and also our beautiful Lincolnshire coastline. My role there now involves economic development and growth. And what's taken up most of my time at the moment, actually, is distributing the business grants that was announced by government to support during the lockdown. But most of the time, I'm looking at the moment at how we respond to the government's prospectus on the Towns Fund and the regeneration of two really important towns for our Lincolnshire coast, Mablethorpe and Skegness. But that doesn't leave out, obviously, our market towns across the Lincolnshire Wolds as well. So hopefully a lot of knowledge about Lincolnshire, and really proud to represent tourism and the visitor economy across Lincolnshire, not just about visitors, but I think Ruchi hit the nail on the head at the beginning to say it's really important to all of us because it's where we live and where we work.
Thanks indeed, Lydia. And let's come back and talk a bit about the Towns Fund, because obviously that's a really important strategic project for the county, indeed for the UK. Actually, I think that'd be worth saying a little bit more about. And you mentioned pride, and that's something that actually we all feel, don't we, still in the county, regardless of the situation. And that, I'm sure, is one of the things that will carry through. That's not going to change in the pride that we have in our beautiful county. So, Lydia, thank you for that broad introduction. I appreciate it. Farhan, you're obviously also in a slightly, I suppose, a generic role, not only being one of my heads of department, but also being your own particular area of expertise. So would you like just to say a little bit about that and therefore what that contributes to us?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I've been with the university since 2003 now, and throughout that time, I've been with the Department of Tourism in its variances. I've had the pleasure of working with a number of people on the panel in various ways. And as a result of that, what we've had is that we've been able to develop as a university key collaborative relationships with a number of key stakeholders within Lincolnshire, whether that be the castle, whether that be the city council, the county council. And as a result of that, we've been able to contribute, whether that be from a student perspective or an academic perspective in terms of research and consultancy, to the tourism, hospitality, event sectors within Lincolnshire. And what that's allowed us to do is to not only gain an understanding as to what is great about the county, of which there's so much, but we've also been able to, hopefully, from our perspective, play a key role in developing those sectors and making sure that they are sustainable for the future. And that is something that we're very proud of within the department and as a whole in terms of the university as well.
Fantastic, thanks, Fine. I know there's a bit of work been going on in academic terms about thinking about responses to the crisis in terms of the visitor economy. Maybe that's something that we can come back to a little bit later on and touch on, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Yeah,
all right,
definitely. There's been so much already spoken about.
Absolutely, brilliant. Thanks a lot, Fine. And Kimberly, can I bring you in and just talk about a little bit about your particular experience, because it's great to have two senior leaders with us on the panel today who are in the visitor economy. So Kim, can you talk a little bit about your role at Lincoln Castle and just how you've been experiencing things?
Yeah, no problem. So I've got over 15 years experience in the cultural sector and have managed a number of different sites in that sector, from museums, galleries and heritage visitor attractions. My role as general manager, I actually sit on the cultural management team for Lincolnshire County Council, who oversee the running and operation of a number of sites across the county. I also sit on the visitor economy board for the LEP, and I'm a trustee for the Lincoln Arts Trust, which has responsibility for running the drill hall. So very much rooted into the cultural sector of the visitor economy. And of course, you know, we've talked about the red arrows this morning, a very kind of broad and diverse tapestry of sites and attractions that form the landscape of the visitor economy in Lincolnshire. And of course, we all find ourselves in a very different situation to what we ordinarily would be, gearing up for a busy bank holiday. So this is an incredible stark contrast to what we expected. And certainly from my perspective, it's been a very steep learning curve in terms of, you know, how we dealt with the initial crisis, what that meant for us, how we've adapted, connecting with our audience and teams in different ways, and how we may want to take some of that forward as we move into what everyone's calling the recovery phase of what we're facing. So a lot of lessons learned. And of course, I'm also on the MBA programme, Craig, as well, and the leadership programme has certainly been something that I've called upon as part of this too.
That's great. Thanks for the plug, Kim. It was brilliant. Apart from
no problem.
Yeah, of course. So, Kim, thank you for that. And so, perhaps what we might do, given your experience, you know, in that particular part of the visitor economy, the cultural sector, we can perhaps come back to that and we talk a little bit about, you know, kind of what's going on specifically in that sector, and as you say, you know, what the recovery may look like there. That's okay. That'd be great. And Chris, we've left you till last, but obviously a very different but crucial part of the visitor economy sector represented by your role. So, Chris, could you say a little bit about a bit more about yourself and your role at Buckland? Chris?
Yeah. Good morning, Craig. I've been in the industry 30 years now, and resort director at Bucklands for 20. Just to give an idea of the scale of the place, in normal times, we normally have about 500,000 visitors, and we employ around 1,300 people. I think one of our key successes is that we employ up to 900 people even in the middle of January, which is important for the coast because it shows that you can extend the season. And yeah, I'm passionate about the visitor economy. I represent the visitor economy and the coast on the Greater Lincolnshire LEP. I'm also chair of the Visitor Economy Board on the LEP. And we instigated a DMO here probably 10, 12 years ago. And I was very pleased that we changed that into a destination business improvement district about 4 years ago. I think that's going to be key because it can raise a lot of funds to help us when we come out and go into the recovery phase. So, and also deputy chair on the town funds bid with Lydia as well. So there's lots of exciting things happening. It's just a shame that coronavirus got in the way of it, really.
Yeah, and a temporary glitch, shall we say, in some of those fantastic projects. And Chris, you mentioned a couple of them there in terms of the development improvement district. So perhaps we can come back and refer to that a little bit more in terms of, okay, so what's that? Where is it now? What was it? What's it doing? And where might that take us? But Chris, I think I mean, partly, you know, people are looking at the current situation, and from an economic perspective, from an employment perspective, clearly the visitor economy has been one that has been probably not too much of an exaggeration to say devastated by the current situation. And perhaps if I just start with you from a business perspective, Chris, because you know the numbers are stark, aren't they? And you talked about 1,300 employees, 500k visitors. So, what's the situation with Butlins now?
It's very tough. I mean, we don't have a clear idea yet exactly what's happening. We know 3rd of July is going to be a key date for us. But I think what people have to appreciate is these businesses can't just be switched on. So what we have to do is move back from when we're allowed to open and see what getting the supply chain in order, because what's happened is a lot of the commercial supply chain has now switched to domestic with regards food, etc. So that needs to be sorted out, getting the team back in. There's going to be a full training program, because the most important thing is we provide a safe and secure environment for our team and our guests, and that's going to need a lot of training to do. So even if we get the get-go, say in the middle of June, we have a lot of planning to do there to bring us through. And as you say, it has had a major impact on the visitor economy. But one of the good things, if there is anything to come out of this, is hopefully at last the government will realise we are not a Cinderella economy. And we are very, very important to the future, not only of the county, but the whole country. And we're now being talked about, and hopefully people will now put long-term plans in place with training and everything else to show we are an industry of the future.
Interesting, Chris. Do you think that, so one of the questions about post-recovery is how the industry is likely to change as a result of what's happened there. So you're thinking that actually one positive step could be that the government could provide much more recognition of this as a critical part of the UK's PLC. Is that how you're potentially seeing that?
Yeah, I hope so. It's one of my favourite hobby horses. Is getting people to understand that it's really success if people holiday in this country. The media love going on about people holidaying abroad, but what we want is people to holiday in this country and have great experiences, which I think helps the economy. So we need to get that message through, but we also need to get the message through that it is a proper industry with proper career paths in place. So many people just think of it as that summer job environment. Yeah. It's not. And I'm really pleased we're calling it the visitor economy and not the tourism industry, because Lincoln University is a key example of what success in the visitor economy is about, how it's changed the whole shape of Lincoln by that being successful. And it's a very wide industry with lots of opportunities for people.
That's great, Chris. And perhaps we may come back if we get the opportunity to maybe talk a little bit more about how you see that, the shape of that industry in the next couple of years. I think it'd be really, really fascinating to hear a bit more about. And Kimberly, from your perspective, in terms of the castle, the cultural sector, I mean, there have been some things done more broadly in terms of the cultural sector, obviously to move experiences online and so forth. I mean, are you seeing that happening from, I mean, how's Lincoln Castle seeing the situation apart from the fact that clearly don't have any visitors right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think connecting with our audience was one of the main things in terms of what we was at the forefront of our minds once we started to get over the initial bump of, you know, business continuity. We started to think about, okay, so how are we going to keep our audience close? How are we going to stay at the forefront of their minds so that they consider us as a place to visit once we are open again for business? And so that did require us to have a bit of a change in strategy in terms of how we the stuff that we put out online and how we talked to our audience, it wasn't so much about reach and promotion to those far and wide. We kind of started to look more locally and to be a trusted voice within the community, and to try and be that kind of friendly neighbour almost. And you'll see that in terms of the content that we've put out on our website and online on our socials too. And actually, I think it is the local audience that is going to be the lifeline for the cultural sector, to be honest, because we know that there are still pockets that we don't necessarily engage with, but we can improve local engagement. And you only have to look to some of the thinking for the nationals in London, where there's a huge reliance on tourists. Up to 70% of their audience can be international visitors, and actually what you're seeing is a lot of visitor attractions starting to kind of look more closely to home actually, and address those imbalances with the audience that they have. So yes, there's definitely been, for the cultural sector particularly, hit first, hit the hardest, and it is going to be the longest to recover, because when we talk about social distancing, particularly for theatres and music venues, yes, you can apply social distancing, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be financially viable. And I think that's the biggest issue within the cultural sector is the viability of some of these aspects of social distancing that are going to impact and influence how visitors experience our sites and venues.
Yeah, you mean it's just social distancing rules? It's just really, really difficult for people to experience something when you've got to maintain that kind of those social distancing rules. That's going to be a key issue, obviously, for sites? Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the things you're talking about there was fascinating, just picking up on the local aspect. So this has been a repositioning for you as Lincoln Castle, hasn't it? To make sure that we're, this back to this pride thing again, right? It's actually generating a business from within Lincolnshire itself. Is that potentially one of the routes to recovery that you see?
Absolutely. That's why the Lincoln Castle grounds are opening this weekend. We absolutely recognise the value of that green space for the community. And so, yes, I do think that focus on the local audience, because that's it. What you want to do as a visitor attraction, as a museum or a gallery, is to get that people's connection with the site, because once people have that connection with the site, that they care about it, and that is ultimately what's going to be so important to our long-term sustainability.
Kim, that's fascinating. That's that kind of connection, that emotional connection, that what would be the affect, the feeling of ownership. The Red Arrows is probably another good example of that, isn't it? But Lincoln Castle is also a superb example of that. And actually, Farhan, I wonder if is that something that you touched on in sort of academic research, in terms of the sorts of things that avenues worth pursuing to look at the recovery. Could you say us a little bit about what the general themes are there that you're picking up in terms of useful avenues for recovery?
Yeah, of course, Craig. I'd just like to echo the points that have been made by my colleagues are absolutely 100% correct. There are so many areas in which this period of experience that we're going through as a community have resulted in us realizing how important the visitor economy is, especially to a region such as ourselves. In terms of looking ahead, it is very much about engaging the local communities. It's very much about engaging the local audiences, like Kim referred to. These will be effectively our bread and butter going forward. And in order for us to kind of go from a recovery phase into the next stage of our recovery, which many people are terming the reimagination phase of our economy, that will mean that we will effectively diversify our products, and we will effectively look at our local industries, such as a gig economy, such as a hospitality, the tourism and so forth economies, in a slightly different way. And traditionally, where they might have appealed to people in a certain way, they will now be looked at very differently. And I think that's important, that we actually look at our facilities and we offer them to our local audiences and local communities, because they will be very, very conscious that they have a vital role to play in regenerating these economies after we get through this initial recovery phase. And if you speak to many people in local communities and audiences, they're actually very conscious of the considerable role they will have in terms of regenerating those local economies, especially within the visitor economy. So if anything, I can add to the comments that my colleagues have made, is that the local communities will have the most important role. And if we are able to engage with them, and if they are able to play their role, they will play a significant part in our recovery of our economy, our visitor economy, and hopefully begin to start the green shoots of recovery, which we are all hopeful for.
Indeed, and thanks, Farhan. And actually, that's sort of potentially one of the ways of countering the significant issue that I know Lydia mentioned. You mentioned to me when we were starting about, visitor economy, and we're having to tell people not to visit, which obviously completely counter to all of our collective mission here when it comes to the visitor economy. And we've had a couple of comments and questions in the thread here, and I'll just pull up one or two of them if I may. And this is an interesting one here. So, beyond the care, how do we continue to attract people to live and work in Lincolnshire and not just visit as a visitor? So it's a slightly beyonder. The visitor economy represents a broader economic value to the county. And Lydia, I wonder if you have a perspective on that from your position. Would you say that there are ways that we can do that in a broader sense and perhaps related to our conversation about the visitor economy?
Yes, we've actually recently conducted a piece of research particularly for East Lindsey, looking at those larger employers in the area, as well as multitude of obviously our smaller businesses as well. And we looked at obviously the issues, and I echo obviously what everybody else has said, but the impact not just on local people, but a lot of our local people are employed in this sector, and the impact for East Lindsey of that is that 90% of our employed people in East Lindsey in tourism and hospitality are currently on furlough. And then you have a second wave of those that are normally seasonal workers that are not going for that employment. And looked at what not just the issues are, but what the opportunities were. Number one came out as how we are going to promote Lincolnshire as a safe place to visit, but also to live in the future, and how we can encourage people to live here and to attract investment into the area. And I think that's really important in terms of how we look at the future of the visitor economy. It's not just around attracting visitors, it's around attracting people to live here, but also to work and to attract that investment into the product. And I was really encouraged by the interviews that I did with businesses that were still looking to invest in the product, because it was important to keep attracting people here.
That's really interesting, Lydia. And there's a couple of themes out there that, Farhan mentioned diversification, mentioned sort of this localism thing is really coming out strongly for me. And I really didn't expect that, actually, but that's a very fascinating aspect of the discussion. Chris, do you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, I think it's important that we recognise, and Lydia made a good point, is about the visitor economy is so important in place marketing as well, because a vibrant visitor economy makes a place where people want to live. And I think one thing we're finding over the last 3 months is the world is changing and remote working is becoming more common. I was talking to my son in America now, and they're saying, you can work wherever you like going forward. They've changed their policy in the last 3 months, and people will really appreciate green space and, a nice, healthy economy. So getting our 5G, our broadband and all that sort of thing sorted is going to be really important to grow the increased pride in our county and attract more people in, I think.
So there's this really symbiotic connection between the growth of our county as a place, as a wonderful place to live and to work, and the connection of visitors who hopefully some of them, the idea being some of them will stay, I guess. Is that's presumably part of it, yeah.
Yeah, you've got to, if you're going to move from London or Birmingham, you want to know you're going to have a really good cultural environment. The hospitality industry is going to be strong. You're going to have nice restaurants. and it provides a welcoming environment. And I think this is a great opportunity for the industry to play a part in a partnership with the councils, etc., to move things forward over the next 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely right. So we had another couple of comments in here, which I think relevant to the discussion. So John said, Lydia's making critical points about investment in marketing Lincolnshire as a destination has always been a challenge, never more critical than now. What's needed is all of the relevant organisations working together across public and private sectors. Absolutely. And I think, John, one of the things that you're seeing here, in fact, you're hearing about the nature of the collaborations that exist, even within this panel, between the university, between the representative bodies and between the businesses. And surely that's one of the great strengths of this county, actually, that we have that huge degree of collaboration, led, of course, in fact, by the LEP. And that really will be, I think, one of our key capabilities, won't it, as going forward. I'm sure my panelists, and you heard how many connections they already have, would tend to agree with that. I've had also, perhaps I can share this comment, if I may, on social distancing as well. And financial viability is going to be a key question. It really doesn't matter about scale. And I know one of the things that people have been doing, and Chris, you mentioned it, is bringing in almost the whole online virtual world in how we live and work. And I'm sure that will probably, I suspect anyway, be one of the potential impacts, the sort of virtuality of what we're doing, not necessarily just having that physical presence. And I know museums are moving their stuff online. We're now working from home, and Lincolnshire is just such a fabulous place when you have to work from home, isn't it? Farhan, is that something that you've been looking at in terms of the sort of the virtuality of the visitor economy, because that's clearly becoming more and more important, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, because even before this all happened, it was actually something that was being looked at by academics, because naturally the way we consume products and the way we look at products is changing, and our consumption patterns are changing. So even before we went on lockdown and all of this happened, the digitalisation, the virtual nature of all of our tourism attractions was actually something that was growing in prominence. I think what this is going to do is actually, in my opinion, have a reverse psychological impact. By virtue of the fact that people can see these attractions virtually and be attracted to them, that will hopefully stimulate a desire or a need to come and visit the county as a result of that. So I am actually all for the digitalisation, the virtual nature of our tourist attractions and our visitor economy, because that will only have positive impacts going forward. And hopefully, once we come out on the other side of this, increase the number of visitors to our locality as well.
Absolutely right. And actually, I'm just going to post a comment. It's quite a long one, but I think this is a really interesting perspective from Holly here, that there's this sort of desperation building up that we've seen actually quite recently since the lockdown started to ease. And she's mentioning the situation in Matlock Bath, which has been full since the lockdown was relaxed. So there seems to be this kind of pent up desire that we're probably all feeling to some extent to get out and to start to visit places again once those possibilities are eased. So presumably this is also something that, from my panelist perspective, that we can exploit. Lydia, from your perspective, do you think, is that something that you think we can plan for?
Yes, absolutely. I was just picking up on that comment that you put up there about being mindful, I think, of the different phases of recovery.
Right.
So whilst I was at Visit Lincoln, we worked really closely with colleagues in the NHS to promote using the assets of what we use for tourism, but repurposing them to look at how we attract really key kind of health professionals into Lincolnshire, which is a really needed area that we need to bring people in for. And what we've done recently, which is hopefully going to be released today, is we've worked, East Lindsey have worked with the NHS and Visit Lincoln to repurpose some of those assets and create a video which is very much around showcasing how beautiful Lincolnshire is, but we need to be focused on kind of making sure that our visitors are safe and well, and then maybe giving us some time before we open up to having too many people come to the coast in these early stages. So it's all about, I think, different timing and how we kind of tell that story, and focusing maybe firstly on our residents and then kind of gradually building that momentum around and looking at how we phase our recovery. I think Kim made a really good point around really kind of re-engaging with our local audience first before we go and kind of bang the drum regionally internationally, because they're the ones that really matter the most. And I think working collaboratively is so important, because we've all got those assets that we can bring. I know I've been working with one of Farhan's colleagues, Georgiana, on how we can really bring that master's students in tourism to really try and look at different ways of working and look at different how we can use our tourism assets, and how we can work collaboratively as Lincolnshire and have that voice for Lincolnshire. Something that's really struck me over the last few weeks is how our counterparts in Yorkshire have really come together. And Craig, you make the point around pride, and I think we can really learn from that and come together as Lincolnshire and have pride of place, but use that as part of our visitor economy and part of our, not recovery, but how we reimagine tourism and build pride, not just in the place, but in our industry.
That's fantastic, and it's so great to hear you in such what relatively dire circumstances for your industry is talking so positively about what can come up. And I'd like to continue that theme, if I may, for the rest of this webinar. And you were talking about recovery, repurposing, showcasing, but safely. And so you've just touched on some important planning steps that are now going to have to go ahead, previewing the return of visitors. Maybe perhaps locally to begin with, actually, because people won't be prepared and shouldn't be travelling quite so far. Kimberly, from the castle's perspective, how is that starting to look from you? Because clearly you'll be in that phase now. Okay, so how are we starting to think about planning for reopening? So can you talk us through what your plans are for over the next few weeks or few months?
Yeah, so I particularly want to pick up on the comment about the application of social distancing. Because that's going to be a new aspect to how we shape the visitor experience. And it's not just about how people kind of move physically throughout a site, it's how they feel. And as Lydia said, it's about how people want to feel safe and secure within the environment. And I think our sector has quite a good history of responding to crises. And if you look at how we responded to the terrorism aspect and the procedures that we put in place and the training that we did with our teams, that always sits behind the visitor facing aspect and what visitors. There is a nervousness around what we have in place, because there is an onus on our visitors to uphold those aspects of social distancing. We can put particular measures in place. We can have staff on site who are upholding those social distancing measures, but there is a responsibility and an onus on our visitors to uphold them. And what we don't want is people flouting them. And we don't want that because of all of the interconnected issues that we've talked about, particularly around marketing the site. We know that there is a particular demographic of our audience, because it's been out there in sentiment analysis, that do want to visit us, that do want to return, but they want to wait and see. They want to wait and see other people and whether they've visited the site safely and securely. So it's a key part, actually, of what we're considering is how the marketing and the messaging around social distancing too. And I did just want to pick up on I wanted to kind of go back to the comment about the collaboration, because I think this is something that at a local level, it's absolutely astounded me how not just aspects within the cultural sector, but just within the visitor economy as such, we've been sharing information with people that oversee retail, pubs, restaurants, and that's going to be so key, is this kind of consistent and unified sector response to help ensure that central government are aware of some of the real big challenges that I've touched on before, and that's particularly around what this means for the future viability of some of those businesses that are going to struggle to uphold social distancing in the way that it has been presented through central government guidance at the moment.
Yeah, and actually we can absolutely subscribe to that at the university as well, because it's causing us some thought about how we resume anything like face-to-face teaching. under those rules. So we can absolutely empathise with that particular situation. So, and Kimberly, sort of kind of things, I guess, the local population may well be, I guess, one of those steps to what you said is about, the wait and see thing, people waiting to see other people make the first move almost, to see that things are safe. And perhaps that's one of the appeals that we could have to our locals, to say, you take the first step, walk up to the castle, come and visit us, and we can make something of that. And that might help to get the message out a little bit more, perhaps. That's perhaps
absolutely. I mean, it's just sitting on a potential group of ambassadors for the work that we do. So it absolutely makes sense to get them on board with what we're doing.
And it's great to hear that the university is helping to contribute a little bit to that as well with our students. And Chris, Kim has mentioned some of those wider policy issues, which I know are of particular concern to you. So and from your role, how are you seeing that? I mean, what are you seeing in terms of the way the government has handled policy in this lockdown, and what you would say that they need to do differently or in addition to what's already being done to support the economy?
Yeah, I think I fully appreciate they're in a very difficult position, but it is that clarity that we need. And as I said earlier, you can't say today, I'm going to open up tomorrow like they did with industry. That won't happen in the tourism sector, because our customers are going to need some lead time, because they won't be finalising their booking. So that can take 2 or 3 weeks. You've got the whole supply chain to look at. And it's also, when you talk about social distancing, we have the problems with customers and team getting those sorted. But then we have the added problem of how we do it with entertainment. Simple things like wrestling or diversity, could those sort of acts go on in our current environment? So we have to relook at all that. Certain of our in-house entertainment's all going to have to be reblocked. So you've got a 3-week, 4-week lead time before you can get your product up and running. So it is going to be very difficult without that definitive bit. But also on social distancing, we keep talking about the 2 meters, but does that 2 meters mean they have to be 2 meters apart if they're back to back? Or, it's just how you lay out venues. Our 2,000. Sorry?
Protected with face masks and all all of the sort of different variables that are around that particular requirement.
Yeah, a venue where you normally get 2,000 people is going to be down to 400. So we have quite a lot of venues, but then you have to look at what the financial viability of doing that is. So businesses might well become open and they might start reducing their losses, but getting to break even or profit and creating funds for reinvestment. And it's so important that people realize the knock-on effect of the visitor economy. It's not the jobs that might be lost in the visitor economy. It's all those wider jobs like construction and everything else, because you're certainly seeing with the hotel industry and elsewhere where they're pulling major investment. Back the cash in the bank, and that's a worrying aspect that's going to come through.
That's right. And Chris, if I may, because you've mentioned it a couple of times already, the importance of the supply chain. We've had a particular question on that from Howard. Interested to hear more from Chris about recapturing the supply chain. Is it actually recapturable? Or have the supply chain become addicted to what has been a major shift towards retail distribution? Would you just say a bit about that from your perspective?
Yeah, I don't think they'll become addicted to it because there are different profit margins dealing with the supermarkets, probably dealing with ourselves. Large single drops are better than having lots of different drops into different supermarkets, etc. But it does mean to change how they supply. So if you're supplying cheese in 5 kilo blocks as opposed to a 500 gram, you've changed your production line. You're not going to do that just like that. It's switching on the breweries. The breweries are not producing anything at the minute in cask, etc. So they've all got to get re-geared up. They've got to get their delivery systems in place. And they have to look at their whole social distancing programs as well. So it is, we believe, going to take 3 to 4 weeks to be able to get in a position for the large operators. If you're a small ice cream kiosk, etc., you can probably switch it on a lot quicker. But all these sort of aspects need to be learned. I think one of the great things that has come out of this, and there are a couple, is speed of decision making. All of a sudden, things that were blockages over the last 2 or 3 years in, say, our industry or with ourselves, we've found problems very, very, very quickly. And I really hope we don't lose that going forward. And that whole partnership approach of councils, businesses, that's got to be really solid. And that will see us through, I think.
So there's some behaviours, if I can just broadly call it that the county has demonstrated in varying different ways. And that's speed and of response has been really, really quite striking, hasn't it, in so many different sectors, in so many different ways, to kind of cutting through previous conventions of of how long it takes to get stuff done. And so you think we can kind of preserve some of that might actually help us in this what is a fairly significant piece of planning that you're talking about to kind of, what did the Prime Minister call it, restart the engines of the economy?
Yeah, I mean, if you'd said to Lydia, I'm sure 3 months ago, that you're going to get however many grants out to people in this short space of time, nobody would have believed that was possible. But with real focus and a lot of hard work, I know that has been achieved. And it's that, rather than getting stuck in the minutiae of stuff, being able to stand back and make some big decisions and plan for the future, I think is going to be really important.
And let's hope that that's a key aspect of the county's resilience, that we've managed to develop that capacity and we've shown what we can do to react quickly when we need to, and that is preserved. And I just thanks, Chris. And I've got a comment, an interesting one from Toby that I'd like to bring in about the technology that we touched on a little earlier. And I think something that I don't know about you guys, but we have been massively concerned about how technology has sustained us through this. And by and large, I think we have to say it's done a reasonably good job. And Toby's pointing out that it's broadly a huge factor in its success. I mean, university are doing a lot of work through the Institute of Agricultural Technology and supporting it in a national institute now. So a lot going on in terms of the technology, and maybe this crisis will perhaps in some ways promote innovation around the visitor economy. Is that something that's relevant to that? Perhaps Lydia, I could bring you in on this. Is this an area that you're looking at? Is this an area, is one of our aspects of recovery here?
Absolutely, and I think from small businesses through to larger businesses. So we've seen some brilliant examples of innovation and diversification from some of our smallest, hospitality and food businesses, where they've done takeaways or afternoon tea in a box, really, really great things to try and engage their local audience and keep cash flow running, really. I'm just picking up on kind of Chris's point around how we can work together really to use the insights that we've gained from these business grants, and having so much connection with so many businesses in such a short period of time to really lobby and make a case for how important things like broadband are to not just the visitor economy, but to Lincolnshire, whether it's agriculture, whether it's engineering, manufacturing, or our visitor economy. Yeah. Brilliant.
Thanks so much, Lydia. And one of our listeners has said, so what about creative ideas then? So what is it that's that, if you, I suppose this is the magic one moment, isn't it, in a sense? And what is it that you're seeing, or perhaps already seeing in certain cases, or things that you would wish for, that you would say, this looks brilliant. This is the kind of thing that's really going to get us through this from the perspective of the visitor economy. Farhan, can I start with you? Put you on the spot with that one. What's the sort of one thing that you're seeing that you say, this is it. This is what's going to get us through this. This is what's going to make us successful.
Yes, really interesting point. I just want to come back. It's a point that Chris made at the very start about how we see the visitor economy being a career path now much more seriously. And one thing that I've noticed with communications with students and talking to students about what life will be like once they graduate from their degrees, the one thing I've noticed is that students have been incredibly resourceful in the way in which they see the industry developing. And I think this new breed of leaders that we are developing through degrees at the university, for example, the key thing that's come out from them is that they know that the visitor economy will reimagine, it will reform in different ways after the COVID crisis. And the one point that they've all hit upon is the element of flexibility, being able to adapt to different scenarios, being able to adapt to what is put forward in terms of different crises to them, yet trying to maintain that core value of their product in terms of the industry. And that's been a really interesting thing to come out from our students, that they recognize the need for reimagination and reform, but also not forgetting what made that product the success that it originally was.
Yeah, thank you, Farhan. And we're all really proud of our students, but we do have the best tourism program in the country by most measures. And we have a young generation there that the university, working in partnership with our colleagues, we want these young people to stay in the county and to bring those ideas and their innovation into the visitor economy in order to grow it. And for me, from a university perspective, that's exactly the kind of thing that is our long-term goal. So thank you for that, Fine. Kimberly, from your perspective, from Lincoln Castle's perspective, what's the kind of really creative thing that you would like to see us all reflect on to rebuild the visitor economy?
I think the way that we digitally engage our audience has definitely been our biggest change and our biggest strength. And I think for me, it's how we get that balance right, because although it has enabled us to offer amazing things in terms of the castle's visitor experience, our Wall Walk audio guide has been available for free as a download. We've had storytelling sessions uploaded onto our YouTube channel. It's never going to replace, it's always an adjunct to what we want, because we want to get people back into our sites and our spaces. We want them to develop that strength of feeling for our places. And I think it's how we creatively use the digital aspect and blend that. But ultimately for us, it's about getting people into our sites and our spaces.
Great, thanks a lot, Kieran. And Toby, I posted just a quote there about very interesting point about how much more challenging travelling abroad is going to be, and how staying in this country, that horrible word, but I'll use it, staycation, is going to be looking much more about places they've never seen, and maybe that's a great opportunity for us in Lincolnshire to.
It's the doorstep tourism.
There it is.
Day out on your doorstep.
Absolutely right. So brilliant. Thanks, Kim. Lydia, from your perspective, you mentioned Towns Fund a little earlier on. Is that something that is going to work in our favour? Do you think, as we look beyond the curve?
Absolutely. And listening to both Farhan and Kimberly there, that word reimagination of the visitor economy, I think, is so important. And I was talking to colleagues in government about how we respond with our Towns Fund proposition to make that really appealing, not just in terms of restarting economic development and growth in those two towns, but also how we can use the renewed interest really in our environment. So in terms of how we can maybe look at cycling and walking, not for our local people, but also how we make that attractive to visitors in the future, and maybe how the Towns Fund could enable some of the investment into the product around that, as well as obviously creating projects that encourage more diversity in our employment on the coast. Yeah. But I think the Towns Fund, coupled with the tourism sector deal, which I believe is very much still on the table nationally, I think those two potential conduits to investment into our county are so important. And I think you mentioned about a magic wand, and I think if I had to pick something, it would be that reimagination and really building on some of the inspiration that I got from your master's students about how we tap into that kind of green, environmentally friendly tourism that can extend the season, encourage people to visit all year round, but also be really mindful of our local environment as well.
Well, thanks, Lydia, and it's a very, very interesting insight that we know a lot. We hear a lot from our students. This generation, the young generation, our environment is clearly in its broad sense, and in the particular sense in terms of responsibility, has to be one of our key strengths, does it not? I mean, that's something that we can absolutely major on. So it's good to hear that our students have been contributing a little bit towards that conversation. So brilliant, thank you, Lydia. And Chris, from your perspective, you've mentioned a couple of things. You were involved in the destination improvement district before the lockdown. You've been talking a little bit strategically about the planning you're having to do. What else is it from your perspective you think that is really going to help to contribute? Do you believe this thing about localism? The government really putting more emphasis on the regions. Do you think that's going to happen? Is that going to help us?
I think it does, because it means that people are closer to what's actually happening and they have a better understanding of the peculiarities of each area. I think that's important. I think one of the key things that we have to remember, though, and when you've had a really difficult time, it's so easy to make very short-term decisions. But what we have to remember at the centre of every decision has to be the guest, and we can't lose focus on that. You know, it's so easy, trite example, to take one piece of chicken out of the curry because I want to get a bit of money back. People have long memories. We have to make sure that we treat these guests when they come back in the best possible way, and we really value them. Because I agree with you, staycation is a horrible term, but what we have to do is convert these people into long-term visitors. And so we need to have a focus on our team and on training and these sort of things that can get pushed back when we have real focus on our P&L. But we need to look forward. And I think coming out of this, and it is going to be a really difficult 6 months, we have some really positive things that can come out with it. But with partnership and focus on the guest, I think we'll continue to get even better.
Chris, thank you very much. And that seems to me like an appropriate note to finish on, actually, which is, you know, staying with that laser focus on the people who are really important here, the people who actually do come and visit us, and will provide that source for regeneration of the economy. But I'm sure our listeners will agree with me that the ideas, the resilience that you've all demonstrated, the innovations that you've demonstrated, but most of all, that kind of pride and partnership. These, for me, are some of the real key things that have emerged that are really going to make us resilient and be able to look beyond the curve for the visitor economy. And with that, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for their fabulous contribution to the conversation. And I'll hand over at that point back to Ruchi to finish us off for the webinar. Ruchi.
Thank you so much, and what an enriching conversation. Thanks to our panelists. The depth of issues that you've raised and the conversations we've had has been absolutely amazing. Thanks to everyone who was listening, and continue this stream of comments and questions to our panelists. I think we could just go on, but we've got to be mindful of time. We've still got 3 minutes left, so we're not going to let you go so easy. Just to finish this off, I wanted to play a quick one-word game with you. So look at your banner. Lydia, this is to you. When you think Lincolnshire, you think one word.
Can you come to me a bit?
Just say sausages, Lydia.
I think of Lincolnshire. I think city, coast, and countryside. Am I allowed 3 as one?
Yes, you are. You are. You have the privilege today. Absolutely. Kimberly, Lincolnshire means.
See, me instinctively, I wanted to say home. It is. Yeah. It's home.
Fantastic. Isn't that lovely? Super. Great. Right. Let's go with you, Chris. The feeling I most associate, the feeling you most associate with Lincolnshire.
Vitality.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Vibrant and vitality. Excellent. Farhan, let's go with the color. The color you associate with Lincolnshire.
Green. Oh, it has to be green, surely.
Yeah.
And blue.
Such an expanse of green. And blue, yes. I'll pick 2.
and if Craig thought he's going to be left off the hook, no. L is for Lincolnshire, Craig, and L is for?
L is for loyalty.
Excellent. Wow. Super. So we can see the depth of there's those words coming out of what Lincolnshire means to all of us. We're speaking from so many perspectives, and each of them representing the pride of what we're doing to Lincolnshire and what we can do beyond this curve. So on that note, I want to thank our panelists once again. Thanks to everybody who was listening in. Just very quickly, Kimberly, you mentioned that you're on the MBA program. So I just want to bring up that we have one cohort, the next cohort starting in September. And this is the email ID in case anybody's interested in being on the MBA program, and it would be our proud and pleasure to have you on there. We continue the series on Resilient Lincolnshire next week. And in fact, this week, we've got a lot coming up this week. The next one up, if I may just bring up, is called Marching on the Resilient Military. A fantastic panel again lined up. It's on Friday, 22nd May. So do log on at 11 a.m. to be with me for this. This week, we also have an education series where our Associate Professor Martin is speaking about the change spectrum. So we're really, really pleased to have everyone with us here today. Thank you once again. As you can see, the sun is streaming through. I'm trying to avoid the rays of the sun as I'm speaking to this. So it's going to be a wonderful week. However, to our listeners and to all of us, please stay safe, stay indoors, and follow the rules. And we'll see you again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.